Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name's Joe. Today I'm going to be looking at Spruance Leader, the latest release by Dan Verssen Games. This is the most recent addition to the ever-growing collection of leader games that I guess you could say has become a venerable series, as it has now been around for about 30 years, I believe, going back to Dan Verssen's days at GMT. So this one is a little bit different than what we've seen before. This one is obviously with the name being Spruance Leader and a ship on the cover. You can see that this is obviously a naval version. In the past, we've had mostly air leader games and a couple of ground combat games, Sherman Leader and Tiger Leader, which I most recently did videos on. I actually have, I think, 7 of the leader games, and I will at some point get around to doing videos on all of them, I hope. But because Spruance Leader was just recently released, I did want to take a quick look at this game. It is different from what has come before, as I mentioned, but the DNA of the leader series is very much evident, and you'll see that as we go through how this game works. The things you would expect from a leader game with, things like SO points and commanders and, buying your units and the 6 different levels of experience for commanders and units. All that stuff is present. The main difference, obviously, is you're working in a naval environment. So you have ships and submarines, primarily. There are also aircraft and helicopters as well. Without further preamble, I think it's time that we just get right down to it and see how this game works. As is the case in pretty much every leader game, you have campaigns that you can play, and they vary in difficulty. This one obviously says easy. They always include one that's basically an easy one, so that you have some introductory way to kind of get familiar with the game and how it works. So this one is the North Atlantic skirmishes, set in 1988. It uses the Atlantic ships. The game comes with both Atlantic and Pacific theaters in terms of both ships and campaigns. So there are several Pacific Ocean-based campaigns in addition to the Atlantic. So this one obviously is based in the North Atlantic off the coast of Norway, as you can see here, with the various numbers here. Those are targets, and there is a target deck, and this is the target deck. Obviously, that's another thing that, it being a leader game, there are many cards, and the cards vary from things like ships. So we have ship cards. We have event cards, as you would expect. Event cards. You have enemy ship cards. Enemy ship cards. You have sub cards, enemy sub cards, obviously. And then encounter cards, which are kind of one of the things that's different about this game, because you have kind of like random encounters. Basically, the way it works is you start here where the blue star is, and then you move through zones towards wherever your target is. So you draw from the target deck, and you find out which of these you are going after, which is the primary target of your mission. And so obviously you start, as I said, you start here and you move through, and then you draw for enemy task forces, which will be in one of these 4 boxes, and some have more or less boxes. I think. I haven't actually looked at all the campaign cards in depth yet, but you roll to see where each enemy task force is. So you have enemy task force counters, like this one, and you roll to place them here. And so you down here at the bottom, which is off shot right now, so down here you have skill levels. If you've played other leader games, you're familiar with this. This is the experience of your units and or commanders. In this case, it's both, as it is in most if not all of the leader games, actually, varying from newbie to green, average, skilled, and then there's also veteran and what's the other one? warrior. Warrior is the highest level. So there are 6 levels. Obviously, in this one, you only get up through skilled. And then, as is also usual, there's an asterisk one that anything beyond these 6, you would get this level, green. So you're not getting anything overly powerful in terms of ships or commanders. Oh, and there are commanders as well. Here's Task Force Commander Kinsley. As you can see, this is his newbie card. It says newbie 3. So he needs 3 XP to promote. And then once he promotes, he would become green. And then there are 2 other cards with the other levels on them. But they get actions. They have cool factors. They have okay and shaken status. So all of these are things that are common to the leader games. This is very much a leader game. The main differences, as I mentioned, are that this is a naval-based game. And so there are some nuances to that are not, not the same as they would be in, say, Phantom Leader or Hornet Leader or Zero Leader, the air games, or also, Tiger Leader or Sherman Leader, which were the tank games. But there is a lot of commonality between those games and this game in terms of the way things work and what's included mechanic-wise. So you have 2 different levels of campaign, short and medium. That's also a thing that you'll see in other leader games where there could even be long campaigns as well. Number of targets, how many SO points you get to build your force. So you get to buy your force with cards for the ships. For example, here's the USS Ticonderoga, the Tycho, or Tycho rather. It's a guided missile cruiser, CG-47. You can see right here, it costs 22 SOs to buy it. The G5, that's its level, green, and 5 to promote. It tells you the year it appeared and what theater it appeared in. So this appears in 83 in the Atlantic. And then it's got a bunch of numbers here that tell you things about what it can do and then what kind of weaponry it can carry. The RGM-84, that is the famous harpoon missile. It also has ASROCs and Mark 46 torpedoes, and of course it has a gun. The R is the range number, so you can detect, and there's 3 levels of detection, 1, 2, and 3. So you roll a 4 or higher, it's a 1, or 4 and 5 is a 1, 6 through 8 is a 2, and 9 or 10 would be 2. It uses a D10, which is also something that's common to most, if not all, of the leader games. So as I mentioned, this is very, very similar to a lot of the leader games. Now, task forces, I started to talk about this before I got derailed. And so you see here 3, and you get 2 counters with a task force counter and an activity counter. And as you move and successfully complete missions, the track will move to the right. So when it says 3, you draw 3 chits. So there would be 3 enemy task forces, A, B, and C. You would roll, as I mentioned before, and place them up in the top part of the card there to indicate where they are. And then, as you move through, you have encounters with the enemy ships, and that's what the encounter cards are for. So the encounter cards will basically determine what kind of encounter you have and their activity level. So 3, none, that means you actually don't have a battle. Whoops. But if you get a low or high, like low would be fewer ships, high would be more ships, basically. And then there's this stuff down here is related to the carrier add-on, which I have, but we're going to start basic and not worry about what's in the carrier or subs or allies expansions. I have all 3 of those expansions, but I wanted to start basic and kind of go through the basic part of the game, the base game itself, what you get if you don't play with the expansions, don't have the expansions, etc. All right, so as I mentioned, the track moves to the right as you progress. We have the campaigns with the number of targets, each mission. So kind of in, like in Tiger Leader and Sherman Leader, you have weeks. This basically equates to that. It's like missions, essentially. So you have a certain number of missions that you're going to end up going through to get to where you're going to kill all your, complete your missions, kill the targets, mission SO points, you'll get 20 additional points for each mission. That's kind of like the SO points you get in a week in Tiger Leader. It's the same kind of concept. Tiger Leader or Sherman Leader, for example. And then you also have, of course, your evaluation based on victory points. So the enemy forces will have a certain amount of victory points assigned to them. If you kill them or defeat them, then you get victory points. And at the end of the campaign, if you have 24 or more, you get a great evaluation. One other cool thing about this particular campaign is it's actually part of a 3-campaign linked grand campaign where you can basically fight, essentially, I guess, the Third World War at sea in the North Atlantic with increasingly difficult campaigns as you go through. So that's an interesting thing that I will probably try to take advantage of. So I did want to make this kind of a short-ish introduction of the game itself. You do have, as well, as you might expect, a log sheet where you enter in your information. So I just started this, right? I'm playing the North Atlantic Skirmishes 1988. You start with 80 SO points and you get 20 additional. I drew 2 commanders, Kinsley and Bryan. So I showed you Kinsley and Bryan. I don't know their levels yet because I haven't finished pulling out my forces. So once I build my ships or purchase my ships, I'll put them in here. And then you'll have level and XPs. And all of this should be familiar if you've played other leader games, because this sheet is similar to what you would see with those other ones where you write in their cool, their stress, you write the target numbers up here and what happened and so on and so forth. So it's really, really familiar if you've played the other leader games. As I mentioned, this is different than the other games because it's got a naval look to it, but it's also very similar to those games. So here we have a look at the board, and you don't quite see everything. Let me push it up a little bit. So you have your forces, and so if you have, say, the Leyte Gulf, for example, and you put that in your screening force, it becomes a fast. And if you're familiar with the leader games, you know what fast and slow mean. It's a fast unit. So it says fast here, and you can see modifiers, detect +1, stress +2. So you're going to get 2 stress for each mission you are part of the screening force. And then you get 3 chits, and that's there are chits for task force ship. So each one of these boxes has a number. Like this is number 1. So you would take this chit and put it in a cup, and then when enemy ships are trying to detect you, they will you'll draw from that cup to find out which ships they're trying to detect and whether or not they successfully detect them. So you put your chit here, and so you might have some other ones, like, say, we also had the Scott, and then maybe we have a couple of frigates in our main force. So the main force is slow, and then you also have supported and protected forces. So maybe you're escorting some troops or something. So they would be back here because they're not combat units, although they can be combat units. So you have your screening force, which is fast, your main force, which is slow, and then your protected force, which doesn't fight but can be targeted. And the reason you might put say a frigate back here is to reduce its stress, because it gets no actions, but its stress goes down by 1, and it gets 1 chit in the cup. So fast gets 3, main gets 2, and the supported or / protected force will get 1. So these guys can be targeted by the enemy, and that's something you have to factor. But you will have some missions where you might have to escort some troops or a convoy, a cargo convoy, or whatever it may be. And then they would be in here, and then if you have a ship that maybe took a lot of stress in a previous mission, you might drop them back into the supported force, and you can actually move them between positions as well. There's a mechanism to do that too. So this is kind of the layout here, and then as enemy ships show up, they will show up in this area, and you have a way that you roll for their position and their azimuth, which is which basically which path they're on, kind of. I mean, if you know military stuff, you understand what azimuth is. But you have, say, an enemy ship. You would roll for it, and maybe you roll for its range. You end up at 5. But then you have to roll for its azimuth, and you may end up in this lane or down here or whatever. So that's basically how you end up placing your ships. And then you can see they have notations here: sub-attack +1, sub-attack +2. So your sub-attacks, when they're in these bands, they end up being increased. Range modifiers for things like detection and hitting, or, hitting the enemy with a missile or a torpedo. There are modifiers for that based on the band, which is just the distance. So this is like the distance and then the vector to where the enemy actually is in relation to your force. And some of your commanders can actually turn your force, and everything's relative to this. So, a sub, for example, they get a bonus if they get out in a flanking position like that. But you can turn your task force as the commander, which would maybe bump this guy here, or bump him off the board entirely, in which case he's out of the battle. Now, that's an action, and commanders get actions based on their level and abilities. And obviously, there's a cost to that, and you can only do it so often per mission or per turn or whatever it may be. So there is a lot of complexity, I would say. The rule book for this sucker is 50 pages long. Now, it does a good job of kind of breaking down how the game works first, like through here, basically the game overview, and then everything else is about how the game plays. And then at the very back, you get an example of play. So it's 50 pages, but it's not, the way it's laid out, I think, is pretty well done. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this kind of introductory look at the game. I'm going to actually set up the game and play it and shoot that as well. And I'll kind of go through it and show you how everything works in practice and let you actually form your own opinion, basically, on how good this game is. Based on my reading of the rule book and a couple of sample run-throughs and things, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to playing it. But like I said, I'm going to wrap it up for now. My name's Joe. This is Hexed Encountered. As always, thank you for watching. Please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing if you haven't already. But until next time, happy gaming.